Chapter 1. The Merchant and the Maiden. Elliot Grant was a man whose name commanded respect in every corner of the bustling city of Alderwick. He was not just a wealthy merchant. He was the wealthy merchant, owning fleets of ships that traversed the oceans and trading in spices, silk, and precious gems. Elliot lived a life of unparalleled luxury. His mansion, perched on the hills overlooking the city, was a symbol of his success. A sprawling estate with marble columns, manicured gardens, and fountains that shimmered under the sunlight. Yet, despite his immense fortune, Elliot carried a quiet loneliness. At 38, he had devoted his life to building his empire, leaving little room for personal connections. His acquaintances admired him for his business acumen, but knew little of the man beneath the tailored suits and polished shoes. A chance encounter. One fateful afternoon, Elliot decided to visit the bustling marketplace in the heart of Alderwick. It was rare for him to mingle among common folk, but he found himself drawn to the vibrant energy of the streets, the chatter of vendors, the aroma of fresh bread, and the laughter of children. As he wandered, his eyes were caught by a small, makeshift stall. A young woman, barely in her 20s, was selling hand-woven scarves. Her modest clothing and slightly worn shoes spoke of a humble life, but her posture was proud, and her eyes sparkled with determination. "Good afternoon," she greeted, her voice warm. "Would you like to see my scarves? They're made of the finest wool." Elliot stepped closer, intrigued by her confidence. "Finest wool, you say? What makes them special?" The young woman smiled, lifting one of the scarves. "Feel it. The texture is soft, yet durable. I dye them myself using natural colors. Each one tells a story." He took the scarf, running his fingers over the fabric. It was indeed soft, and the vibrant colors were unlike anything he had seen. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara," she replied. "And you?" "Elliot Grant." Her eyes widened slightly. "The merchant?" He nodded. "The very one. Tell me, Clara, how much for this scarf?" "2 gold coins," she said, meeting his gaze steadily. Elliot handed her 5. "Consider it a token of appreciation for your craftsmanship." Clara tried to protest, but he waved her off. "You've earned it," he said with a smile. "I'll be back for more." A growing connection. True to his word, Elliot returned to Clara's stall the following week, and the week after that. At first, their conversations revolved around her scarves and his business ventures, but gradually they began to share stories about their lives. Clara spoke of her late parents, who had taught her the art of weaving, and of her struggles to make ends meet. Elliot, in turn, shared glimpses of his lonely childhood and the pressure of living up to his family's expectations. One evening, as they strolled through the quiet marketplace, Elliot found himself admitting something he had never told anyone. "All my wealth, all my success, it means nothing if I have no one to share it with." Clara looked at him, her expression soft. "You may have wealth, Elliot, but you also have a kind heart. That's worth far more." Her words stayed with him, and for the first time in years, Elliot felt a warmth he couldn't ignore. A proposal unveiled. Months passed, and their bond grew stronger. Elliot found himself looking forward to his visits to the market, not for the business deals or the sights, but for Clara. She was different from anyone he had ever known, unpretentious, compassionate, and wise beyond her years. One day, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Elliot took Clara's hand. "Clara," he began, his voice steady, but his heart racing. "I've spent my life building an empire, but it feels incomplete. You've shown me a world beyond wealth, a world of simplicity, honesty, and love. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined that someone like Elliot would choose her, a simple weaver, as his partner. Yet, as she looked into his eyes, she saw not a wealthy merchant, but a man who truly cared for her. "Yes," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "Yes, I will." As they stood together under the fading light, the city around them seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them, two souls from different worlds, united by a love that defied all odds. Chapter 2. A Life Rewritten. The weeks that followed Clara's acceptance of Elliot's proposal were a whirlwind of emotions, adjustments, and new experiences. The news of their engagement spread quickly, as news in Alderwick always did. The city had never seen a match like theirs. The wealthy merchant and the humble weaver, worlds apart, yet inexplicably drawn together. People spoke of them in hushed tones, some skeptical, others envious, but most of them simply curious. Elliot, for the first time in his life, felt as though he were living with purpose. His usual days spent in meetings with traders, planning expansions, and overseeing shipments seemed mundane compared to the joy of planning a future with Clara. Yet he knew that he could not simply leave his empire behind. His business was vast, and he was tied to it in ways he couldn't untangle easily. As for Clara, the world she had known for years was about to change in ways she could hardly comprehend. She had spent her life in the quiet corners of Alderwick, working tirelessly with her hands to create beautiful, functional art. Now she was to marry a man whose life was one of extravagance. She wondered how she, a simple woman from the market, would fit into his world of fine parties, sprawling estates, and sophisticated gatherings. A new world. The first time Clara stepped into Elliot's mansion, she was taken aback. The marble floors gleamed under the chandelier's light, and the grand staircase seemed to stretch endlessly upward. A team of servants scurried about, preparing the house for the upcoming celebration of their wedding. The air smelled of fresh flowers, and the sound of distant music floated through the hallways. She felt small in this overwhelming space. It was nothing like the cozy cottage where she had grown up, where every corner felt familiar, every creak of the floorboards comforting. Elliot, sensing her unease, took her hand and led her through the house. "You'll get used to it," he said, with a reassuring smile. "This is our home now, Clara. It will feel like yours soon enough." But Clara still couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. The silver cutlery, the fine china, the servants who bowed at Elliot's every word. It all seemed too grand. She had never known a life like this, and she wondered if she could ever truly fit into it. The wedding, the day of the wedding arrived, and Clara felt a mixture of excitement and fear. She stood in front of the mirror, her wedding dress, a simple yet elegant creation, adorned with delicate lace and beading. It was nothing like the elaborate gowns that most brides wore, but it felt right for her. Her hair was braided into an intricate style, and the soft glow of the candles reflected in her eyes. She looked at her reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. The small market girl, the weaver, the woman who once worked tirelessly with her hands, was now about to marry a man whose name was known across the entire kingdom. "Clara, are you ready?" Elliot's voice called from the doorway, pulling her from her thoughts. Clara turned to face him. He looked every bit the wealthy merchant in his tailored suit, but there was a softness in his eyes that made her heart swell. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. A wedding of two worlds. The ceremony was nothing short of spectacular. The grand hall was filled with guests dressed in their finest attire, the air thick with the scent of roses and lilies. The guests sat in rows, whispering amongst themselves as the bride made her way down the aisle. As Clara approached Elliot, she saw the way his eyes lit up, his expression full of love and pride. She could feel the weight of their union, the joining of two very different worlds. There were so many expectations placed on her now, so many eyes watching. But in that moment, all that mattered was the man standing before her. "Clara, you are my heart," Elliot whispered, as they exchanged vows. "I promise to give you everything I am, and to love you with all that I have." Tears welled in Clara's eyes as she spoke her vows, her voice trembling with emotion. "Elliot, I will stand by you through every storm, every triumph. I will love you not for your wealth, but for the man you are." When they exchanged rings, the crowd erupted into applause, but for Clara, the world fell away. In that moment, it was just the two of them, two souls bound together by a love that transcended everything they had known before. The days ahead, as the wedding celebrations continued into the evening, Clara found herself in a daze. The opulent ballroom, the music, the laughter, it was all so overwhelming. But amidst it all, she found solace in Elliot's presence. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the house grew quiet, they retired to their new bedroom. Elliot smiled at her, a look of tenderness in his eyes. "This is just the beginning, Clara. I know things are different, but we'll figure it out, together." Clara nodded, taking a deep breath. She knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, adjusting to this new life, finding her place in Elliot's world, learning to navigate the intricacies of high society. But, for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. With Elliot by her side, she knew they could build something strong, something lasting. As they lay side by side in the quiet of their room, Clara whispered, "I'll never forget where I came from, but I'm ready to build a future with you, Elliot." And so, as the stars twinkled in the sky above, Clara closed her eyes, knowing that her journey with Elliot was just beginning. The union of two worlds had just begun to unfold, and there was so much more to discover. Chapter 3. Building a New Life. The months after their wedding were filled with a whirlwind of changes, challenges, and surprising joys. Clara had grown accustomed to the opulent lifestyle that came with being Elliot's wife, though it took time to shed the lingering doubts that had plagued her heart in the early days. The grand mansion now felt like home, her home, but she could never quite silence the voice that reminded her of her humble beginnings. Elliot, ever the supportive husband, did his best to ease her transition. He understood the immense shift in her life, and he admired her resilience. Yet, he knew that being married to him wasn't always as glamorous as it appeared. He had seen Clara's moments of doubt, when she missed the simplicity of her cottage, or when she quietly watched the servants with a kind of nostalgia in her eyes. But over time, Clara found a way to balance her past with her present. She often spent time in the garden, tending to flowers and vegetables, much like she had done when she was younger. She'd invite the servants to join her, teaching them how to weave together the vines and flowers in the way her mother had taught her. Slowly, she started to build a life in this new world, finding small ways to stay connected to her roots. A growing family. As the seasons passed, the couple's bond grew even stronger. Clara's gentle influence on Elliot's life softened his sometimes rigid demeanor. He found himself slowing down, taking time for things that mattered outside of business, like walking through the gardens with Clara, watching the sun rise, or sitting in front of the fireplace, reading to her as she embroidered. Their love was no longer just about grand gestures. It was in the quiet moments shared between the two of them. It wasn't long before Clara discovered she was pregnant. The news was a surprise, but it brought nothing but joy to both of them. Their home would soon be filled with the sound of tiny feet running across the floors, and their hearts swelled with excitement at the thought of becoming parents. Clara, who had once feared that she would never truly belong in Elliot's world, now had a new sense of purpose. She would build a family, a legacy, for both herself and Elliot. She wasn't just the wife of a wealthy merchant. She was the mother of their child, the woman who had carved out a place for herself in a life she had once thought impossible. The challenges of wealth. Yet, even with the promise of a growing family, Clara could not entirely escape the complications that came with wealth. She quickly learned that being married to a man of Elliot's status meant being thrust into the complexities of high society. There were constant social events, gala dinners, and meetings with influential individuals, many of whom only saw Clara as a curiosity. They would compliment her simple, humble beauty, but there was an underlying condescension in their words. Clara had never been one to back down from challenges, but it was difficult to navigate the complex expectations placed on her as Elliot's wife. She often found herself missing the quiet, authentic life she had once lived. One evening, after an especially tiring dinner with other high-ranking merchants, Clara returned home, feeling emotionally drained. She sat in the quiet of their sitting room, her head resting in her hands. Elliot, who had been working late in his office, found her there. "Clara, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice filled with concern as he knelt beside her. She struggled to find the words. "I feel like I'm not enough. They see me as someone who doesn't belong, someone who can't keep up with their world." Elliot placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his voice unwavering. "You don't need to keep up with anyone, Clara. You're perfect just as you are. And you belong with me. You belong here, with our family. That's all that matters." Her eyes welled with tears, and she leaned into him for comfort. In that moment, she realized that Elliot had always seen her, truly seen her, not for her wealth or status, but for the woman she was. And that was all she needed. The birth of their child months later, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel, a name that symbolized strength and new beginnings. His arrival filled their lives with joy, and the house seemed brighter with the soft coos and cries of their newborn. Elliot, ever the proud father, spent hours with Samuel, marveling at the way his small fingers curled around his own. Clara watched him with admiration, her husband, the great merchant, now a loving father. Their son had brought out a side of Elliot she had never seen before. a tenderness and vulnerability that made her love him even more. As the days passed, the couple's bond deepened, and they became more united in their shared vision for the future. Their home was no longer just a place of luxury and wealth. It was a sanctuary where love, trust, and family thrived. Clara's role in the family had come to mean more than any title or social standing. A new beginning. Years later, Clara and Elliot found themselves in a different place, a place of understanding and peace. They had created a life together, one built on love and mutual respect. Clara had become not just a wife, but an equal partner in their marriage, and Elliot had grown into a man who valued simplicity as much as he did his wealth. Their children, Samuel and a younger daughter named Emily, were growing up in a home filled with laughter and love. Clara had returned to her roots, teaching her children the value of hard work and humility, while Elliot continued to expand his business, always with an eye toward giving back to the community. And while they still faced challenges, just as every couple did, they had learned that it was their love for each other that would carry them through. The journey had not always been easy, but together they had found a way to make their worlds meet. As they stood together on the balcony of their mansion one evening, watching the sunset, Clara turned to Elliot with a smile. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Elliot wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "We have. But as long as we're together, there's nothing we can't face." And in that moment, Clara knew that they had built more than just a life together. They had built a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come. The end.